So, The Great Reset, COVID-19 by Klaus Schwab. Take note of when this was published, July of 2020. Also take note of, you don't need to see this upside right anyway probably, but the extensive endnotes. There are quite a few. Let's see here, 174 I think it was to be exact, 172. Well-researched book, quite a few endnotes. However, no, Schwab would have, he'd be in the know, so he would know that there's this pandemic as of about December 2019, but this didn't hit the public arena until about March 2019. And he wants us to think that he authored this entire super well-researched book. Takes a long time to do that kind of research. 172 endnotes to look through all that stuff. You know, it would take me several months just to do that. But he did all that, and then he wrote this book within a couple months. So that's interesting. Also, things to be aware of as we go through this. Really nowhere in the text are there presented any kinds of studies to corroborate some of the insane claims that he makes. Some of the things that you would note going through here is strong anti-Western, anti-American sentiments, anti-family sentiments. Visiting with your family is bad. It's actually bad for the environment. So that's another thing that you'll see come forth through a lot of the these narratives that are being promoted by globalists is very anti-family, anti-nationalist, anti-religion, anti-all the things that fly in the face of communist dictatorships. So the theme of the book can be summed up here on page 13. Because of their inherently disruptive nature, epidemics throughout history have proven to be a force for lasting and often radical change, sparking riots, causing population clashes and military defeats, but also triggering innovations, redrawing national boundaries, and often paving the way for revolutions. That's the theme. This pandemic is exactly what we needed, convenient for him. This is exactly what we needed to reshape the world to how I want it to be. Post-human, apocalyptic. Thus, there is nothing new about the confinement and lockdowns imposed upon much of the world to manage COVID-19. All right, so we're normalizing lockdowns. His point was that it was done in the past. It was done by other nations. In the Byzantine Empire, they did it. Inca emperors. It's a normal thing. It's a good thing. Don't worry about the lockdowns. Lockdowns are great. You need more lockdowns, actually. Otherwise, the planet's going to end. I'm just going to read quotes. I'm not reading paragraph to paragraph. We're skipping ahead to 18. It might thus provoke changes that would have seemed inconceivable before the pandemic struck, such as new forms of monetary policy. So you hear talk of going to a digital currency. This is another fantasy of Schwab's. The notion of fairness acquiring political potency, radical welfare and taxation measures, and drastic geopolitical realignments. All right, remember Cloward Piven we talked about in the preface to this. What does that sound like? Well, it's Cloward Piven. We're going for a welfare state, hence all these handouts. The possibilities for change and resulting new order are now unlimited and only bound by our imagination. We'll see that phrasing throughout these documents, through globalist documents. Talk about new order, the new world order. Anybody familiar with prophecy, Christian prophecy, knows that there's a global one world government coming, and that is, you don't have to be a Christian now. We're combining religious prophecy with reality. You could say, well, that's just all those dumb Christians. Is it? Because obviously there's a very well organized and very powerful elite group that are pushing for globalism. So not so crazy, is it? We will adjust the norms of confinement. Will we adjust? Here's the questions we need to ask. Will we adjust to the norms of confinement? Will a majority of us or not abide by the rules? The containment of the coronavirus pandemic will necessitate a global surveillance network. That's great news for him, because we need, again, along with the suppression of free speech, there has to be surveillance. Have you read 1984? If you haven't, I recommend you do that now. That lays out pretty clearly how surveillance and the eradication of free speech go hand in hand. You have to have it. You have to have surveillance to eradicate free speech. Here's a problem he lays out. World population has grown exponentially. We know that's a globalist problem. They hate that. History shows that epidemics have been the great resetter of countries' economy and social fabric. Again, goes back to the theme. Suppressed, here we're celebrating the Black Death that suppressed 40% of Europe's population in just a few years. Remember, suppressing the population is what they're heavily invested in. Lots of billions of dollars, tons of research for decades they've been putting into suppressing the population. So make no mistake, they can try to put on a sad face when they talk about millions of people dying. That's exactly what they're trying to achieve. It's in their own documents. The logical conclusion of these 2 points, hopefully I won't have to go back to the 2 points. What was it talking about? Governments must do whatever it takes and spend whatever it costs in the interests of our health and our collective wealth for the economy. There you go. We need to be able to do whatever we want. Trust us, it's in your best interest. You're going to die if we don't. The economic and societal damage of a lockdown is glaringly obvious to everybody, while success in terms of containing the outbreak and preventing deaths, a prerequisite for a successful opening, is more or less invisible. Okay, so it's saying, yep, lockdowns look bad because we see small businesses suffering. However, the benefits are invisible. They're there, you just don't see them as well. Yeah, they're invisible because they're not really there. Like he said, this is also in this book, the lockdowns, the air started smelling better. We all noticed it. You noticed, I noticed, of course, that the air smelled different. It was more fresh. Mother Earth was coming alive. Did you notice? I don't know that I did, actually. I just wanted to fit in with everybody else who's apparently noticing these things. If we collectively recognize that beyond a certain level of wealth defined by GDP per capita, happiness depends more on intangible factors such as accessible healthcare and a robust social fabric than on material consumption, then values as different as the respect for the environment, responsible eating, empathy or generosity may gain ground and progressively come to characterize the new social norms. Do you see what he's implementing there? Responsible eating. So you see this theme also emerge throughout these documents. Controlling the food, responsible eating. This is the same guy that's saying, we're going to start eating more bugs. Literally, we're going to start eating more bugs. They do that in these third world countries. There's no reason we can't do that either. Let's get away from the meat. Less meat, more mealworms, more grasshoppers. A more effective approach may be for policymakers to target welfare-enhancing interventions more directly. Here we see that theme emerge again. Let's create that welfare state. Some have called for degrowth, a movement that embraces zero or even negative GDP growth that is gaining some traction, at least in the richest countries. As the critique of economic growth moves to center stage, consumerism's financial and cultural dominance in public and private life will be overhauled. This is made obvious in consumer-driven degrowth activism in some niche segments, like advocating for less meat or fewer flights. By triggering a period of enforced degrowth, the pandemic has spurred renewed interest in this movement that wants to reverse the pace of economic growth, leading more than 1,100 experts from around the world to release a manifesto in May 2020, putting forward a degrowth strategy to tackle the economic and human crisis caused by COVID-19. Their open letter calls for the adoption of a democratically planned yet adaptive, sustainable, and equitable downscaling of the economy, leading to a future where we can live better with less. All right, so we've been flourishing and succeeding too much. Let's have less of that. We're going to cause some degrowth, welfare, bare minimum. Remember, when wealth is distributed, it's equal amounts of poverty for all. It's not equal amounts of success. When you have unequal wealth, when you don't have government distribution, you have some people that can at least live good lives and other people that still live okay, but not as well. When you have distribution, you have everybody living equal lives of poverty. As for a global virtual currency, there is none in sight yet, but there are attempts to launch national digital currencies that may eventually dethrone the US dollar supremacy. The most significant one took place in China at the end of April 2020 with the test of a national digital currency in 4 large cities. The country is years ahead of the rest of us, or the rest of the world, in developing a digital currency combined with powerful electronic payment platforms. All right, we're gonna hit that digital currency. What's gonna happen when we hit that digital currency? When the US dollar is dethroned, that's when they're going to implement a social credit system, also like China. Remember, these people are China worshippers. The Chinese communist dictatorship is the model that we're aspiring to, okay? So digital currency is the goal, and also what follows that. Once you have digital currency, you control whether people get to eat or not, so that all of these other things that they're aspiring to fall under that. That means, if you don't know what social credit system is, that's when, if you're not believing the right things and saying the right things and doing as we say and falling in lockstep with all of our dictates, you don't get a high social credit score. That means that you can't participate in the things that the rest of us can. Your freedoms are going to be limited. We can turn your money off by doing that because you said that you don't trust what we're doing. You don't trust the government. You said something bad about our leader. So we're shutting you down. Total control. Digital currency is the end of life as we know it. Some of the broad global contours can already be delineated. First and foremost, the post-pandemic era will usher in a period of massive wealth redistribution. All right, so we're gonna redistribute that wealth. That way it's not some people have to eat Spam while some people eat steak. It's everybody eats bugs. One of the great lessons of the past 5 centuries in Europe and America is this: acute crises contribute to boosting the power of the state. Yeah, that's why you initiated it. So they knew exactly the benefits of COVID-19, of rolling out a pandemic. They knew that this is exactly what we need to secure power. That's why they did it. That's why they're singing its praises. I think this goes back here. Since then, the response to major crises have always further consolidated the power of the state, starting with taxation, an inherent and essential attribute of sovereignty belonging as a matter of right to every independent government. As a matter of right, it is our right to take your money. Stop whining about it. Don't need that. Don't need that. Thus combined, the risks of financial globalization became ever more apparent after the great financial crisis that began in 2008. Thus combined, they triggered the rise of populist. Oh, here's the part that I want to point out. They triggered the rise of populist and right-wing parties around the world, most notably the West, which, when they come to power, often retreat into nationalism and promote an isolationist agenda, 2 notions antithetical to globalization. So this is why they hate nationalism. They hate traditional morality, which is Christian-based morality. They hate the family unit. These are all things that are, like they said, 2 notions that are antithetical to globalization. They're going for globalization. They don't like populism. They don't like right-wing parties. But the risk that the revival of the nation state leads progressively to much greater nationalism is real. Be careful about that nationalism. You know, nationalists, they're all xenophobic. If we do not improve the functioning and legitimacy of our global institutions, the world will soon become unmanageable and very dangerous. There cannot be a lasting recovery without a global strategic framework of governance. So, I'm sorry if you don't want a one world government. This pandemic has just necessitated it. It just has to be now. The more nationalism and isolationism pervade the global polity, the greater the chance that global governance loses its relevance and becomes ineffective. Put bluntly, we live in a world in which nobody is really in charge. Oh, that's terrible, especially when you're the one that wants to be in charge. Whether it's pandemics, climate change, terrorism, or international trade, all are global issues that we can only address and whose risk can only be mitigated in a collective fashion. Interesting. These are the very things that I always point to as the invisible threats that don't really exist in a way that can be authentically 100% demonstrated. It's all theoretical. The pandemic is theoretical. Their brainwashing is the information control network is so detailed and it's so widespread and pervasive that they really have harnessed that narrative that makes it feel like there's a pandemic. Again, though, remember that you wouldn't even know there is a pandemic if your TV wasn't telling you. If you didn't have a TV, you'd have no idea. No clue. It's an invisible threat. Climate change is also an invisible threat. And at least in this country right now, terrorism is an invisible threat. We see images that we're presented with on the television. Of those three, terrorism is probably the actual threat. However, it's our government that they fund terrorism and they promote terrorism, so they are the terrorists. Careful of those invisible threats. Those are the kind that they need to seek total control over you in order to mitigate. Here we talk about the environmental reset. Again, a respiratory illness is very closely tied to the world, the health of our earth. You can't separate the two. They're obviously connected. At first glance, the pandemic and the environment might seem to be only distant related. They don't even seem to be distantly related cousins. They seem to have nothing to do with one another, but tell me more. They're actually much closer and more intertwined than we think. Both have and will continue to interact in unpredictable and distinctive ways, especially distinctive ways, because they're not the same, ranging from the part played by diminished biodiversity in the behavior of infectious diseases to the effect that COVID-19 might have on climate change. So now a respiratory illness has an impact on climate change. All right. While for a pandemic, a majority of citizens will tend to agree with the necessity to impose coercive measures, they will resist constraining policies in the case of environmental risks where the evidence can be disputed. All right, that's why they went with the pandemic, because that, he's saying, majority of citizens will agree with the necessity for us to take dominion. Nowadays, most scientists would agree that the greater the population growth is, the more we disturb the environment. The more intensive farming becomes without adequate biosecurity, the higher the risk of new epidemics. Is that why Bill Gates is now the owner of, the primary owner of greater than 50% of America's farmland? Because they're taking control of that? Maybe. Population growth, though. The greater the population growth is, the more we disturb the environment. That's a problem. Population growth, again, that's the real plague, the human virus. We now know that air pollution worsens the impact of any particular coronavirus. Do we? What then might such a strategy look like? The considerable size and scope of the challenge can only be addressed by a combination of 1, a radical and major systemic change in how we produce the energy we need to function, and 2, structural changes in our consumption behavior. If in the post-pandemic era we decide to resume our lives just as before by driving the same cars, by flying the same destinations, by eating the same things, by heating our house the same way, and so on, the COVID-19 crisis will have gone to waste as far as climate policies are concerned. Commuting less, working remotely a bit more, bicycling instead, or walking instead of driving to keep the air of our cities as clean as it was before the lockdowns, vacationing near to home, all these, if aggregated at scale, could lead to a sustained reduction in carbon emissions. Again, no data to back that up. This is all just complete nonsense. Riding your bikes is actually going to change the world. That's as stupid as cow farts are destroying the world. That's as stupid as them in Germany hooking up contraptions to suck cow farts out of cow buttholes and store them in contraptions on fart neutralizers on cow backs to save the environment from something that animals have been doing since animals have existed. Governments led by enlightened leaders will make their stimulus packages conditional upon green commitments. So you're corporatizing the world. You're taking control of everything by doing that, and there are no businesses that are not going to participate in your agenda when you're subsidizing only those who are touting your narrative. Commuting is a destroyer of well-being. The longer it is, the more detrimental it becomes to our physical and mental health. Cool, all right. I didn't know that. That's another thing. I would like to see that backed up by science. Commuting actually destroys your mental health. I find myself spiraling into deep, dark depressions every time I drive home from work. It's just that drive, it just is, it's so draining on me. Not relaxing, not a way to wind down. Most of the time when I talk to people about their drive, unless they're like, they have a super long commute, they like doing that. You like driving. It's a way to wind down. It's relaxing. It certainly doesn't damage your physical. It becomes detrimental to our physical and mental health. Commuting does? What the hell is this guy even talking about? A relation of causality exists between air pollution and COVID-19. Okay. Here, let's see. Is there a... Nope. There's no reference there. There's no resource. That's just a statement. But a relationship of causality exists. Okay. So planetary health often correlated with the absence of humanity. Hence the green obsession of our eugenicist banker overlords. They are insistent on depopulating. They're druids. And druids are essentially satanic. They're earth-worshipping pagans who want people to go away, except for them because they're elite. This is druids. That's why they meet amongst the trees. That's what druids do. There's a strong case for acting more forcefully on spatial planning and land use regulations. All right, we gotta control land use. It's a problem. You know, some people feel like, you know, now might be a good time to find a plot of land, like, I don't know, it's 40 or 50 acres, and just get a cabin out there, just in case things really go south. I've got a place. No, that's bad. We need to regulate the amount of land people can own. Trust me, they've thought of it all. Here we go. AI. They love AI. AI is now all around us, from drones and voice recognition to virtual assistants and translation software. Our mobile devices have become a permanent and integral part of our personal and professional lives, helping us on many different fronts, anticipating our needs, listening to us, and locating us, even when not asked to do so. Automation and robots are reconfiguring the way businesses operate with staggering speed and returns on scale inconceivable just a few years ago. Innovation in genetics, with synthetic biology now on the horizon, is also exciting, paving the way for developments in healthcare that are groundbreaking. This guy also authored The Fourth Industrial Revolution. That is basically a work discussing a post-human era, largely operated by robotics and AI. And this is coming. It is a matter of time. It's not a matter of if. That is the inevitable development of technological innovation, especially considering that people at the tip of the technological spear are have these strange motivations. We will see how contact tracing has an unequaled capacity and a quasi-essential place in the armory needed to combat COVID-19, while at the same time being positioned to become an enabler of mass surveillance. They love that surveillance. Again, that has to happen. They have to control people, what they are doing, what they're seeing, what they're saying, and what they're believing, even what they're thinking. In one form or another, social and physical distancing measures are likely to persist after the pandemic itself subsides, justifying the decision in many companies from different industries to accelerate automation. Indeed, automation technologies are particularly well suited to a world in which human beings can't get too close to each other or are willing to reduce their interactions. Our lingering and possibly lasting fear of being infected with the virus will thus speed the relentless march of automation. So another goal that they've achieved with this pandemic is providing, it's like a sub-Hegelian dialectic. We've got a problem here in people getting too close to each other. So to maintain this social distancing, we're going to implement more robotics, more AI, which can be useful. It's not, I'm not saying like all technology is evil. It's the ultimate aim. What they're trying to get to is not a good thing. Successful contact tracing proved to be a key component of successful strategy against COVID-19. So again, that contact tracing. The most effective form of tracking or tracing is obviously the one powered by technology. It not only allows backtracking all the contacts with whom the user of a mobile phone has been in touch, but also tracking the user's real-time movements, which in turn affords the possibility to better enforce a lockdown. Here they're talking about tracking in Hong Kong, where individuals placed in quarantine are equipped with a mobile phone to monitor their location to be publicly identified should they breach the rules. As the coronavirus crisis recedes and people start returning to the workplace, the corporate move will be towards greater surveillance. Tracking, surveillance. Most people, fearful of the danger posed by COVID-19, which makes them easy to control, will ask, isn't it foolish not to leverage the power of technology to come to our rescue when we are victims of an outbreak and facing a life or death kind of situation? They will then be willing to give up a lot of privacy and will agree that in such circumstances, public power can rightfully override individual rights. Get rid of those freedoms. That's our justification for removing freedoms. This is a celebration of the destruction of freedom. Here's talking about big businesses getting bigger and smaller businesses shrinking and disappearing. We see that. We see that in their own strategies. COVID actually can't thrive in Walmart or Target, but it's alive and well in mom and pop shops. That's where the real danger is. We've got to shut those down. But Walmart, we're going to leave open. Think about that for a second. Like for any other industry, digital will play a significant role in shaping the future of wellness. The combination of AI, the Internet of Things, and sensors and wearable technology will produce new insights into personal well-being. They will monitor how we are and feel. They'll monitor how you feel and will progressively blur the boundaries between public healthcare systems and personalized health creation systems, a distinction that will eventually break down. Streams of data in many separate domains ranging from our environments to our personal conditions will give us much greater control over our own health and well-being. Read between the lines here. I know this sounds good, but extrapolate a little bit. In the post-COVID-19 world, precise information on our carbon footprints, our impact on biodiversity, on the toxicity of all the ingredients we consume and the environments or spatial context in which we evolve will generate significant progress in terms of our awareness of collective and individual well-being. Industries will have to take note. COVID-19 has forced all the banks to accelerate a digital transformation that is now here to stay. Sounds like a digital currency is inevitable. Here we have the, say right here, that redefining our humanness. There's a darker side to this. Our attachment to those close to us strengthens with a renewed sense of appreciation for all those we love, family and friends. But there's a darker side to this. There's a dark side to your love for your family. Beware of that family love, because it also triggers a rise in patriotic and nationalist sentiments, with troubling religious and ethnic considerations also coming into the picture. In the end, this toxic mix gets the worst of us as a social group, blatantly despises the family, despises patriotism, and despises religion. And I know a lot of people that think they're woke have a good case for hating religion. Religion is the cause of all wars, man. Oh, really? That's a real deep thought. Thanks, Einstein. You know what really is the cause of all the wars? It's governments manipulating religious factions against each other. The governments create wars. There are extremist religions that do, but you know what they really hate is Christianity. That's the one they're really talking about, because remember, they hate nationalism, but what they really hate is Western nationalism. And what is Western nationalism? Well, he tied it himself to religion. Now, he's not saying Christianity because that would be socially unacceptable. He says religious. Well, in the West, religion means Christianity. So specifically, he hates Christianity. And you see this in the public sphere too. Definitely okay to hate Christianity and to hate Christians, but not okay, not as okay to rip on the others. Is it all right to lie to the public? All right. Here's where he's asking questions. We're going to have to ask these questions. Shall I give to those who have nothing and show empathy to those whose opinion differs from mine? Is it all right to lie to the public for some greater good? Are you kidding? This reminds me of that Lockstep document where in their hypothetical scenario, this character is sent out on a work detail with specific orders to behave behave ethically. These people act like robots, where they don't have that natural humanness. They have ethics to them is something that can be strategically implemented. It's not something you do for any kind of goodness, like an inherent spiritual goodness. It's a tool. They're sociopaths. That's what sociopaths do. They don't have empathy. That's what this cremation of care ceremony is. That's what sociopaths do. They not only don't have empathy, they celebrate a lack of empathy. They find power in a lack of empathy, to such an extreme that there's some alarming evidence out there for some of these people engaging in the most heinous of child torture, because that is a practice in the dissolution of empathy. That's what they love. That's the kind of people they are. I mean, they do dress up in priestly robes in front of an ancient Canaanite deity and sacrifice people, at least in effigy, if not in real life. So is it that surprising? The presence of disease kills people, and the absence of livelihood also kills people. Therefore, now that testing and contact tracing capacities are widely available, many individual and collective decisions will of necessity involve complex cost-benefit analyses and even sometimes a cruel utilitarian calculus. A false dichotomy is what we have there. The presence of disease kills people, and the absence of livelihood also kills people. The false dichotomy is this: because there's a disease present, we have to remove people's livelihoods. There's no other way. Yeah, that is not true, though, is it? I would wager the lockdowns have done absolutely nothing for us. First of all, there would have to be a pandemic, and there's not. I'm not saying there's no virus, but there is no pandemic. You can look at the CDC's own numbers. Now, the CDC has come out and said that only 5% of COVID deaths have been strictly COVID. The rest have been associated with comorbidities. The creator of the PCR test is saying we cannot be using the PCR testing because it's inherently flawed. It's going to produce positive results when there aren't any. So a great way to inflate COVID cases, put COVID cases on the rise, and further fuel that narrative that there's a deadly pandemic out there. And you know, I think maybe I'm wrong. There is a pandemic out there. And just this morning, I opened the door, stepped out on my porch, and the stench of death hit me immediately. I looked out, and dead bodies all the way down the street, piled one atop another, decaying right there. I mean, we can't keep up with the dead body removal. There's so many people dying from this horrible pandemic. Also, by the CDC's own admission, the death rate has not improved. You think if we're in the worst pandemic that the world has ever faced, maybe aside from the bubonic plague, that we would see the death rate maybe go up a little bit in 2020, but did it? Nope, it's lower than it had been previous years. Plus, suicide and murder has been on the rise. So make of that what you will. Now, when we talk about these things, people say, you have to trust the science. Don't you trust the science? But they don't know what the hell they're talking about. What science? I'm looking at actual numbers. And when I give you numbers, you tell me that I'm a conspiracy theorist. So what science are you talking about? Because I'm actually reading stuff. I'm looking into this information. It's really all I do lately for the past several months. But you're scientific. What you really mean by that is you believe everything that the floating head on the magic rectangle in your living room is telling you. That's your science. The problem with science is that it is now political. There's a political motive. That means that it's not objective, and that means that it's not science. Science, by necessity, must be objective. It must be calculating and completely devoid of all emotional interference of any kind of political allegiance or any allegiance, but only gets at raw data, which is not happening. So I think that that sums up this Great Reset work of globalist nonsense. And I can't think of anything else to add to that. We see the Hegelian dialectic just rampant throughout these global catastrophic scenarios. We see the Cloward-Piven strategy at play throughout every little mandate that they have, a push toward feudalism and developing a welfare state, and also supreme control of information, which they're working feverishly on, bringing in the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Defense, just crazy government interference with social media, the media they already own and run completely. But once they find a way to completely secure the narrative on the internet, then we're done. And I think they're going to achieve that. So I'm putting these out there. Probably going to be wiped off. And my only hope is that they float around long enough that they're out there when all the big name, the videos that actually get hits and that develop an audience, those are going to be removed. At least maybe there will be some, there will be a counter narrative floating around out there that somebody could discover later down the road. I don't know. I'm shooting from the hip here. But that's all I have for the Great Reset, which, by the way, is a conspiracy theory. If you ask those aforementioned floating heads on the magic rectangle in your living room, the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory. That's not real. Except I can see it right here. It is. Here it is. It says the Great Reset. Feels real, looks real. So there it is.